It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Lote by Schola von Reinhold. Would you like to do the plot summary or shall I?
Why don't you?
All right. So Matilda is an escape artist. She is trying to escape from her circumstances, which in this case are being a black woman who grew up in public housing in England. So she invents new identities for herself all the time, using these invented identities to research her fixations, as she calls them, who are historical figures that she is into to a extreme degree, and which give her a sort of synaesthetic kind of pleasure. And these are, for the most part, real people who actually existed from the interwar period, members of the Bright Young Things, mostly queer, some people of color. Unfortunately, people keep finding her out, and broke and desperate, she applies to a what she thinks might be a business retreat or an artist residency somewhere in Europe, which leads her to the Wumpty Dumpty Dom Center, where she is subjected.
Somewhere in Europe associated with her latest, a town in Europe associated with her latest fixation.
Yes.
This is important.
And there she finds evidence of an old secret society while contending with a new secret society.
Yeah.
All right. I think I managed that.
I think that was good.
Are there wizards in this book? Yes.
I mean, yes, actually. The book is not exactly fantasy, though it is sufficiently dreamlike that it might kind of be. It feels like it is set in a very slightly different reality. And so, but yes, absolutely, there are wizards. Mm-hmm. And there are also lesbians, or at least there's a lot of gay people.
Matilda does not use the word lesbian, and I think would never use the word lesbian.
It is true.
Matilda loves the word queer.
Yes, there are a lot of queer people of all varieties. And in general, I mean, Matilda is not going to let herself get pinned down into anything more precise than that anyway.
Yes.
So...
No, Matilda is far too fluid to ever be anything in particular, I think. We are certainly meant to infer that there is lesbian behavior going on behind the scenes.
Yes, and there's also, I mean, it is not stated, but you can definitely read her as trans, given that the one name in her long litany of names that she will not share with us is her original one.
That is interesting and never occurred to me.
Oh, really?
Somehow, in reading this, which is partially because I was in the hands of the audiobook, which is a spectacular performance, and which I must recommend, particularly since it's easier to get outside of England.
Lote's has been released by Duke University Press, and if you should absolutely support your university presses.
I should say that the ebook is the thing that's difficult to come by, which I believe is because of the images in it and the rights thereunto appertaining.
That would make sense, yeah.
But regardless, fantastic audiobook. I must repeat that. Really good performance. But yes, no, that is certainly a permissible reading, because there's a lot of stuff about being trans in here as well.
So yes, there are wizards. There are a wide variety of queer people. And do they fight? Oh yeah. Everybody is fighting with everyone in this book.
Everybody is trying to out-wizard everybody in this book.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, including Matilda.
So why should you read this book?
Well, I found it very personally relevant.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of Isaac bait, so...
This book is extreme Isaac bait, but even if you're not me, I think it's beautifully written.
It is. The writing is lovely, and it's genuinely funny.
Yes, I was going to say beautifully written, some extremely funny jokes.
And not just like jokes, it's just there's so first of all, excellent unreliable narrator with a really compelling voice, and I there's a lot of things I really liked about the narrative and Matilda as a character, and the way that the narrative voice sells her as a character. But this includes just, she's very clever and funny. And also, so, you know, her jokes are good, but also the situations that she gets into are also just pretty funny, even when she doesn't find them funny.
It's a hilarious, hilarious book. I mean, I think that it is going to be more funny to you if you have been in these kind of academic settings.
I think that if you spent time with either academics or pretentious artists, or, you know, worst of all, the combination of the two. But yes, the academia jokes are funny. The, oh no, I'm surrounded by incredibly pretentious artist jokes are also very funny.
Yes. And I think that it has some interesting things to say. I think it has some good counter programming in it.
Yes, though, sort of.
Although it depends on what point you think it's making, I suppose.
Well, yes, it's also, I'm not sure. It is a wonderful portrayal of somebody who is living her entire life as a piece of art, and sort of in defiance of capitalism and white supremacy and, you know, heteropatriarchy, etc. On the other hand, it does not disguise the ways in which this can be really miserable, and the ways that, you know, that everyone involved in this project are sort of end up kind of eating each other alive. So it is counter-programming in the sense of the world should be better, but on the other hand, it's making a pretty compelling case for maybe you shouldn't be doing this.
Oh, 100%. If anything, it tries to soften the blow and fails to.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Actually, you know, so why should you read this also if you like early Colson Whitehead, but you think what I would really like is for this to be, you know, queerer and British?
Oh, it's such Isaac bait,
right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, you know, in that it's doing a very good job of just, you know, completely attacking the society that it is set in, but but it is sufficient. There's enough self-criticism / self-loathing that in the Viewpoint character, that it's not it is not it is making it beautiful, but perhaps not unrealistically utopian in any way.
Yes, I would agree.
And you know, much like early Colson Whitehead, it is incredibly depressing.
Oof. So that is perhaps one reason why you shouldn't read this book.
Yes, that's also why you shouldn't read this book. It gave me another reason. It gave me a migraine. Like an actual migraine. I may have already been coming down with said migraine anyway. But you know, there's just it's a very absorbing book.
There's a point at which a book gives Matilda a migraine, and it's very well described. And so I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, I already had the migraine at that point, but I remember reaching that and going, "Oh, honey, I know exactly how you feel." I mean, different kind of migraine. You know, this one did not feel like an attack on, you know, myself in the way that the horrible Neon book does on Matilda. But part of the thing is that it's an extremely absorbing narrative voice and a narrative, and it is weird, you know, and it is weirdly dreamlike. And the prose is good enough to actually pull this off. And also, so it is kind of pulling you into the headspace of people who are mentally ill and self-destructive. And so I just, you know, read this one when you're feeling reasonably rooted in yourself, I think would be my advice. Do read it.
Yes.
But like,
that's interesting. It didn't feel that way to me.
Well, maybe it's because I had a migraine.
Well, no, I think I can see why you would say that, and I think that it's possible that I've also just been. This is one of those books, and I've come across and loved a number of these books in my life where it's like there may be a way out is the story of the book, and not in a fantasy way, not in a science fiction way. It's a book about the real world that suggests that there might be a way out of the trap that we're all in.
Yeah, but I'm not sure this book ends on the... I think this
They
book...
never do, because there isn't one. And I was prepared for that.
I honestly think that this book ends up making a very good case that there isn't a way out.
Yes. And I had my, oh my God, please tell me there's a way out. And then the book finally tells me there isn't a way out experience with like 3 of these ago. And so I was prepared. I was like, okay, but there's not going to be a way out, is there? You know? These books run the gamut from Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum, which is quite like Lote but without the jokes, to the forgotten classic Lucky Wander Boy, which is about a magical arcade game somewhere in Japan. And also The Night is Short Walk On Girl, which in its movie adaptation upset me a lot. More on that later.
No, it's just, but again, some of it is just about, like, if you're the sort of person who kind of dissociates a bit when reading. And this may also be a text versus audiobook difference.
Could very well be.
Anyway, just saying, make sure you're in the right headspace for this one.
Purely on a literary level, I think the second half drags a bit.
Yeah. It does. I mean, it's doing the thing that we see a lot, where it's a very good portrayal of a certain mental state, and unfortunately that mental state is a little bit boring.
Yes. If you're not interested in at least one of the things that's happening when you're about like a fifth of the way into it, you can probably stop at that point.
Yeah.
Because you do have to be interested in the stuff that she's talking about, I think.
But any of this stuff, like, you know, you can be interested in the really interesting racial dynamics that are going on, the even more, to me, interesting gender dynamics that are going on. Or, you know, there's research and there's art and there's, and then there's also just descriptions of beautiful places and clothing and food. Well, drink more than food. Yes.
Oh, that's another thing. Everybody in this book's an alcoholic, and nobody ever acknowledges it. And that could, if that's going to be a problem for you.
Yeah, that goes, I think, so should we segue into content warnings?
Yes. Let's segue into content warnings. Gigantic content warning academia.
Yeah, seriously.
Everybody is drunk, and there's a lot of drug use. There's sort of an overwhelming sense of terror that surrounds this book, but not of anything in particular. Like, so it's not like I can say, oh, there's violence, so there's, you know, sexual assault, etc., because there really isn't any of that. But
the problem is that the narrator is very aware of how precarious her position is. Matilda's, and you, the intelligent reader, know what will happen if she slips up one time too many. Right,
exactly. Like, you know, homelessness or prison is definitely not off the table for her, and that's established very quickly. And both of those conditions would be like destroying for her. Not that it wouldn't be for everyone, but Matilda would find it destructive on an aesthetic as well as a physical level. She's sensitive, you see. And then there's a lot of, you know, sexism and racial animus, of course, both historically and concurrently. But yeah, I think that probably covers it.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's get into talking about this fascinating book.
Yes.
Spoiler zone. Spoiler zone, darlings. Okay. So I love this book, obviously.
I remember reading this and being like, you know, by the end of the maybe the second chapter, being like, oh, I can see exactly which Isaac buttons this is pushing.
Yes. No, or I mean, the sumptuous descriptions of everything, the that enticing feeling that maybe in fact you are so special that you don't have to work. Um, the every
and specifically that enticing feeling of you are so special that you shouldn't have to work, and somehow it will all work out.
right, that being asked to work is in fact a bit of a moral moral outrage because your soul is just that pretty. Like I'm a pretty boy at heart. I will just say this. Like, sadly only at heart these days, my darlings. Oh, the ravages of time. I had those boyish curls once. Basically all of the bright young things who she talks about are historically, averred, attested, with the exception of.
Well, I mean, with the exception of her main fixation throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. And yes, the all of the young boys coming down to breakfast and announcing to their parents that they're going to be great beauties, or that they're going to go off to visit the local doctor's wife in jewelry because everybody here is so provincial. This speaks to my fundamental temperament. Unfortunately, I'm not a hustler, and I've spent most of my life doing manual labor of one kind or another.
Okay, so actually, this is a good segue to one of the things I really liked about this book, because in a lesser book would have driven me insane. Which is that, because there are a lot of books like this, of sort of this, I'm a beautiful soul, I'm so artistic and creative, and thus anybody expecting me to work, it's a moral outrage. And I often find these books incredibly stressful and frustrating because because the person is skating on the edge of precarity all the time and never seems to be willing to put in the necessary effort, like the minimum necessary effort to keep yourself going.
Right.
Which, and particularly this one where she's at an artist residency, where, the minimum necessary effort to keep yourself going at an artist residency is kind of the minimum necessary effort to keep yourself going during any given semester of grad school. Like, eventually in grad school, you got to start doing things. But, you can get away with doing absolutely nothing for about one semester.
Right.
So long as, you can bullshit your way out of it. And indeed, Matilda just can't. But it is a sufficiently good depiction, accurate, compelling depiction of somebody trying and just being defeated by executive dysfunction.
Yes. That
I was like, oh, okay, no, you really can't. This isn't one of those suck it up, if I unmedicated can suck it up and do it, so can you. This is no, you have made the effort, and this book is giving you a migraine, and, yes, okay, you're throwing it out the window. Well, I wish you could have kept trying, but no, I get it.
Yes. And, concomitantly, this book is absolutely upfront at all times about, okay, actually living this life requires as much effort as working, if not more. It's actually harder and more stressful to live like this, even, and to keep it going. And it's and it involves, it's a matter of what your dignity will allow you to do. And if you're feeling that your dignity will not allow you to do a day job, then you better hope that your dignity will allow you to do a lot of coupon fraud. Or in the case of Mordecai, a lot of sex work for very rich people. Malachi.
Yes. And actually, I think another thing that really makes it work in this book is she's just not very good at it.
Oh, no.
You see her, she watches people who are good at this kind of hustle pull it off. And she leans on them to the extent that she can. But she's just not very good at it. Thing is, she would be very good at being a rich socialite. But she just doesn't her skills and talents just do not align to any of the roles that the world has cast her in. And on the one hand, I don't find the rich socialites compelling in the way that she does. But on the other hand, I'm like, you're right. It is unfair that they got to do this and you couldn't.
There's an essay written by an artist inside this book entitled White People Should Not Be Allowed to Paint or Write Novels, which argues that just because painting or novel writing is played out as an artistic medium in European culture, that doesn't mean the folks who didn't have access to these forms for structural inequality reasons shouldn't get a crack at them now. As with everything in this book, this is both a joke and not a joke. But I did think the same logic could be applied to colonialism or empire building, a famously fun activity. And indeed, this logic was applied by the Japanese, who were late to the party, but very enthusiastic learners. Exactly. Like, why can't I mean, Matilda is clearly an extremely gifted writer. And it's like, well, why can't she be Virginia Woolf? Well, there are a long list of reasons. But, number one on the list is that Virginia was an aristocrat and thus was given space to be her weird experimental lesbian self in a way that other people weren't. But she becomes fixated on those people who were able to make it work somehow through fraud, bluff, sheer persistence.
Yeah, well, I mean, and many of the people that she is fixated on were born into it.
Yes.
But I think part of what makes Hermia, I can't remember her last name.
Hermia Druid, as in hermetic druid.
So incredibly compelling to her is that, she doesn't have all these, she's a black woman in an even more racist and sexist era, and she somehow manages to skate, and she really is skating by, like, all the bits and pieces that Matilda can find about Hermia's life, most of which have vanished. And one of the big questions in the novel is, were they suppressed? Was she real? Is this just that, history has not historically been nearly as interested in, women of color? But she's good at it in a way that Matilda is not.
Yes. This allows her to be Matilda's sort of proxy and heroine in this. But the other thing that comes with Hermia's story is this profound and mounting sense of fatigue, even as she reaches her 40s. It's like this, in the same way that Erskine Lily can barely go outside half the time, it requires so much energy just to be out and visible in the world as this outre thing that she has to continue to be, that it's not sustainable in any more so than this sort of interwar idyll was sustainable. It requires an enormous amount of energy and an enormous amount of attention and grift, and when there isn't a surplus, it'll all come crashing down. And which is part of the sort of the most depressing thing about this book is that it has the gall, the temerity to end on this note of optimism right before COVID was going to happen. It's right. Like people are taking over squats. There's this sort of upcoming, feeling of social progress in Europe. And it's like, no, honey, you all are going to have a really hard time going forward, I'm afraid. But I don't want by that to suggest that this book is dour or even serious, because
it has the same kind of sparkle that really drew Matilda in.
Yes, and there are so many things that I want to, so many amusing things that I want to touch on, delights, luxuries that I want to touch on, like the evil throuple that keeps stalking her when she's in England.
The evil throuple, which she's not the entire time in the book. She's never sure. Are they a throuple or are they just a couple with their kind of codependent roommate? It's never resolved, which is great. And the fact is, they're not even evil. They really just want to be her friend, and they are completely incapable of understanding that maybe if she's going around under a different name, they should just chill.
Yes, exactly. You never know if the malevolence that she ascribes to them is real at all, or if they're just like curious gossips like everybody else that she knows.
Yeah, I genuinely don't think it is. I mean, like Matilda has a tendency to associate taste with inherent morality.
Yes, she absolutely does.
You know, which is just patently false. And so I really think, you know, this couple, they're incredibly tacky. They, you know, serve weird food that tastes like applesauce and carpet.
There are no chairs in their house.
There are no chairs in their house. But, you know, like all of their sins are aesthetic sins or just failure to read the room. I think they genuinely think she's cool.
One of the things that made this book such a delight for me is that one of like Matilda's earliest founding memory is like listening to some, you know, rich artist asshole basically being able to completely blow off an interviewer on the radio and being like, oh, that's what I want. I want to be a rich asshole artist in the 90s. And she literally has a Wallace Shawn fever about it. You know, it's like, it's such a swooning moment for her that it rewrites her brain a little bit. And because of her upbringing, she is like, I am completely immune to, you know, minimalism, brutalism, modernism. Because it's great. Like I keep coughing up concrete dust and bits of plaster keep working their way out of my body as I sleep. You know, I have this aesthetic fascism that means that I can, without guilt, you know, see the beauty in Rococo. And I'm like, oh yes, I'm exactly the opposite of you. I had my like Wallace Shawn fever looking at the Barbican Centre in London, you know, which is this giant brick edifice, right? And I've always been in love with all this, the social housing and like these giant mega projects and the sweeps of concrete and all of this stuff, the stuff that you're getting in concurrent Kendrick Lamar videos, incidentally. And I'm like, oh man, I understand you so much, and yet we're coming at this from a completely different place, and I hate sweet cocktails and I hate absinthe, and I have no interest in you know, Vivian Evelyn Waugh, darling. I was thinking of Vivian Stanshall. Can I cram a Vivian Stanshall song in here? Perhaps later. But like the thing that I feel so in common with Matilda is this sort of like the hunted animals need to sort people into threats and non-threats, which comes from never feeling secure. But in her, and this leads to lumping and splitting, of course. She loves to sort people into categories. It's her favorite thing to do, is to like judge and categorize people and then make moral, as you say, you know, decisions about them based upon their aesthetics. Except add to this the I think that she's genuinely has synesthesia around social groups.
Oh yeah, no, I think that her synesthesia is real.
Yeah, she has synesthesia, and it's not just in. If you saw Kiana's comic recently about what color the number 6 is, which I will reblog when this episode comes out.
And you saw the notes to Kiana's comic about the color and gender of the number 6.
People are going to be, you know, people are at war with each other about what color and gender the number 6 is, you know, but we have significantly more serious differences here about like what color modernism is and what color Rococo is and what color and tastes, you know, particular political revolutionary ideas are. And like it does make living in the straight world, if I can put it that way, like physically impossible for her because it's just so ugly and off-putting and raw, even though it's possible that she might have been able to learn otherwise, as we see in that little blip where she's starting to kind of dig the Garovian thing.
Yes. until she sort of deprograms herself.
Right. She starts to internalize it and then panics because it would fundamentally change who she is.
And I mean, to be fair, this is another example of she's doing the thing which in some ways is the smart thing that could actually help her survive. And it's like, oh, but that's so awful.
Yes. So speaking of things that I found relatable in this book, we've talked before on this podcast about the worst job, your worst job. One of my worst jobs was sitting in the basement at the University of Chicago, cold calling alumni and asking them for money.
Yeah, that was a really bad job.
But I was also trying to do homework while I was down there doing that. And my homework in that instance was reading a book by Harry Haratunian.
Sorry, keep going.
So for those of you who don't know, Harry Haratunian is you would say he's a historian, perhaps. He's just talking about the history of Japan. How bad could that possibly be? But that's, if you don't know postmodern historiography or continental theory, as Matilda describes Garreau here. The opinions expressed about Harry Haratunian are Isaac's alone, and in no way reflect the opinion of Alexis, who is incidentally currently employed as an acquiring editor in East Asian Studies. It's reading that is trying to kill you. It is an assault on your ability to understand language in an effort to put across theories of narrative, which he has the gall to connect to real things that happen to real people of another race and country than his own, which at the very least Garreau is not connecting any of this stuff to anything, is committed to pure erasure. And so I understand what it means to be attacked by a book in this way. And the thing, like, I understand how words go together. I understand what language is. Surely I can read any book, if it's not about, like, you know, a scientific subject that I don't know anything about. And yet, no, people are able to build these edifices of impenetrable scientific jargon around nothing at all, which is actually where part of my obsession with wizardry comes from, is because when I decided to not be an academic, to not go to grad school, it was like 5% of the people who are doing postmodern historiography are real wizards, and 95% of them are fakes. And the only people who have the necessary knowledge to be able to tell them apart are the people who are actually already in there. And I know this because I have submitted a paper which I know to be a fake, and it got an A. And where does that leave me?
I was really annoyed about
that. I know you were. But that's such a Garreauvian moment, like my doing that to those poor Zen koans. And like, so it's like, yeah, no, this is most of this is charlatanry, and even the tiny piece of it that isn't, what on earth are we doing and why? What is this? And
I would like to note, just speaking as somebody who, you know, works with academics quite a bit, that not all academic writing is this.
No.
It's just this, and including not all academic writing in East Asian Studies is this. This is just what Isaac found personally extremely compelling in undergrad. And then
it was admittedly
had his rude awakening moment.
It was admittedly what I was being sold by the University of Chicago's insistence on postmodern historiography, to an extent that other universities certainly had not become committed to by that point in time. But
yeah, fortunately, I somehow managed, while taking a very largely overlapping set of courses to you, somehow this all just completely eluded me.
I guess it was the people who I found charismatic on the faculty board.
Well, yeah, it was the people who found charismatic, and also, actually, to note, the people who found you charismatic as, you know, a particular kind of young white man.
It's true. It is undeniable.
I think that I think actually, to tie it back to the novel, that there is two reactions to encountering this sort of world that is compelling but hostile to you personally. and one is to get, deeply enchanted with it and make it work for you anyway, and one is to just like utterly reject it and either attack it or, just refuse to process it. And it is fun to watch, Matilda go through both of these. One with her sort of rococo, bright young things, and the other with this awful postmodern anti-capitalist art.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the central tension in the book, is the ping-ponging back and forth between these two poles. And Matilda's like, like white-knuckled attempt to separate her kind of Arcadian from that kind of Arcadian. The thing in her that makes her want to spend all of her time misty-eyed in the archives looking at pictures of bygone days versus the white men who are doing it for racist reasons right next to her. The guy who's doing Churchill, as Elizabeth /Joan points out. And like that snapping back and forth is sort of what basically drives the second half of the novel in the form of Matilda's foil, Griselda. Mm-hmm. How did you feel about Griselda?
I mean, she's really interesting.
Griselda is a fascinating figure.
She's a fascinating figure, and I mean, she is such a good foil because to some degree she is, in fact, she is the person who encounters this, who has the same kinds of reactions that Matilda does, but just mirrored to like the opposite aesthetics.
Yes. But she demonstrates that she has the capacity to sort of to undergo that polar flip in her aesthetics that Matilda almost did and then didn't.
Well, Matilda briefly does and then flips back.
Yes. Because Griselda is able to sort of, it's almost like a summer fling, It's a Rumspringa almost.
It's a summer fling that she seems to do every summer or two.
Yes, where she is overcome by all of the self-repression that is necessary to be a Garovian and becomes an aesthete just for a couple of months. Because this book is oddly sexless, which is actually something that I want to discuss.
Yeah.
For being a book that is about, sybaritism and the luxuries and the senses, there is no sex in it whatsoever. And I think that this makes the question of whether there is in fact erotic tension between Griselda and Matilda like a very vexed one, because we get to see this play out between Hector and Erskine Lily.
Yes.
The revelation that they all went to school together and Erskine Lily went to school with them was something else.
Right.
But, Hector trying to decide whether he can be the fancy gay boy that he obviously is, and immediately deciding that he can't be over and over again without any,
mm-hmm.
Without any consideration for how this might feel for the people who he slums it with when he does slum it.
Well, I mean, to be fair, part of it is that, I mean, that's Matilda's read, but when she talks to Hector about it, he's like, no, I mean, he's Erskine Lily is the one who's ashamed of me because I know his dead name. And then, of course, because he's an asshole, he says his dead name. But, like, Hector I don't think that Hector feels like he's slumming it. I think part of it is that he feels like, is that he has a thing for his old classmate and then keeps feeling like he's getting rejected for not being sufficiently aesthetically interesting and fancy.
It is interesting to take it, like, it is a challenge to look at things through Hector's eyes because Matilda hates him so much.
Yes. And I mean, for good reason. Hector's really obnoxious.
Hector is absolutely obnoxious, but you're right. It's like there's ample reading for it to be unfair on that part. And if it weren't for Hector's constant misgendering of Erskine Lily, I would feel more inclined to be sympathetic to him, because there is.
And I mean, I'm not particularly sympathetic to him. It's just, I think that, I think that at least some of Hector's bafflement is genuine. And that he's, that he sees himself as the one who can't quite, who sort of is following Griselda's polar flips. And, but that like, whether that he's sort of waiting to see which ones of this weird triad that he's in are going to tolerate him when. Because he's just not really capable of doing any of this on his own.
He is in the unenviable position of being forever in the social train to a complete monster. A complete maniac. And it is unlikely that he is going to be able to actually develop a personality of his own unless he manages to get away from Griselda at some point. And I suppose that there is the... It's probably for the best. I didn't get a chance to say what there is. One is sad to see Griselda, turn after they successfully do the ritual. It is sad to see Griselda turn her back on them and to go back to Garou. But there is also a bit of a relief because Griselda is a fucking nightmare. Speaking of Kiana, here are some notes she has on the alchemy in this book. We don't actually get around to discussing the climactic sequence in which Matilda takes the alchemical draft and becomes a luxury for a second or two. In the book, it says, the final transcendent stage of Hermia's tincture was not white, but simultaneously iridescent in black. The final color of the alchemical greatwork is actually red, representing the sun. It goes black, white, yellow, red with some substages, including the peacock stage. Kiana finds it hard to believe that the author wouldn't know this, and her off-the-cuff interpretation is that it's demonstrating how stunted everyone involved is. Alchemy has been famously and ahistorically reinterpreted as a psychological process. So Matilda conceiving of white as the final stage when it's only a stopping point is pretty funny. It's also unsubtle race imagery, and maybe a poke at dualism/binary thinking. We can't get past black and white, Garou and aestheticism, etc., etc. Garou talks about a synthesis, but neither he nor anyone else in this book actually integrates and moves on. They only flip-flop between poles. So that final stage of the magnum opus can never be reached. Or the author just made a mistake. And honestly, you don't need that in your life.
I mean, honestly, they're all kind of nightmares, but...
Yes, I think that's probably true. Can you imagine just trying to have a conversation with anybody in this book? Like,
I can imagine it, and it's a nightmare.
Like, somehow Elizabeth/Joan ends up coming off as being one of the most humane and interesting people in the whole book, and she is on coke half the time and, like, randomly screams at you.
Yes.
I suppose Agnes is
the most grounded person.
Is the most grounded person with her habit of just casual art theft. I thought all of the sort of criticism of archiving and archives that happens in this book is, like, I think pretty much spot on.
Oh yeah.
I have no real argument with any of it. I really like the observation that you don't need a conspiracy.
That, though, this is one of the ways in which the book kind of undermines itself, because it says you don't need a conspiracy, but actually it's a conspiracy.
Yes.
Hermia is being covered up, like, by an honest-to-God, I mean, it's mostly a one-man conspiracy, but, like, there's an honest-to-God conspiracy going on.
Well, I mean, is it a conspiracy? I think there's
Yes, because, like, okay, so it's this one guy's project, but the thing is, he has enlisted all of these people who have either money or institutional power to safeguard his specific, like, his suppression of this black, of this black artist. And, by, like, making, and they enforce that. They keep her lost poetry collection under lock and key.
But that's the mechanism by which it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It doesn't mean nobody's racist or nobody is intentionally suppressing.
But it's not that nobody's racist. This is one man very specifically doing it, and he has built a massive institutional edifice around it. I mean, like, if you go up to somebody and you go, okay, the reason why I cannot find this one poet in the archives, and I cannot figure out, and like historians haven't been able to really, definitively substantiate that she even existed, is, but I think that there's a real reason for that, and I think it's because every trace of her life has been collected by this one man, and it has been archived, hidden as somebody else's work, and even her former apartment and all of her things have been locked away in a hidden museum that only one man can ever exercise, and there now exists an institution specifically to cover it up. That's a conspiracy theory.
It is, yes.
That's insane.
It is.
I mean, the thing is, the book does a good job of selling you on the idea that somebody would do this. And like the specific casual way that this man treats this Black artist's life as his own personal art project is extremely true to life. But like, it is nonetheless, it is a conspiracy that is like made this Black artist vanish. And, so I do not think that the book actually, I don't think that the book is arguing that you don't need a conspiracy. Because if it is, it's not doing a good job.
Well, I'll put it this way. Agnes, who has spent her entire life being called a conspiracy theorist for saying that there is there's a concerted effort to keep Black people, to keep historical Black people forgotten, and to suppress and to lose, quote unquote, Black people's art, does turn around at the end and say there doesn't have to be conspiracy. And what she means by that is that there doesn't have to be one like overarching man who is running this as a, governmental or culture-wide project. All you need is some highly placed racists. And because the culture itself caters to them. And I think that's what Grow is meant to represent. Here is one highly placed racist who got a grant from got a corporate grant, basically, to run his, the corporation doesn't know what he's doing. It's arguable that nobody in the center knows what's in the center, because the whole point of the center is that we don't look at
nobody in the center. Nobody in the center knows what's in the center.
Right. But it's like when you say there's this racist conspiracy, you get the feeling that, everybody is intentionally working together to quietly be racist. When in fact, it's like, oh no, we just all work for this one guy. And, we don't entirely know what he does. It's Simon the Jobs with Bradley Beaning and looking at that picture of Hermie and being like, this must be from the 1970s because she's got an afro. You guys were wrong.
Yes.
It's that is sort of what the conspiracy looks like, rather than, an overarching conspiracy of silence.
Yeah, but the thing is that, again, like, the mechanism by which this particular artist has been suppressed is sufficiently elaborate that it, I think that the book somewhat argues against, like, first of all, I don't think that you can take anything that any character in this book says at face value, including Agnes's, because, Agnes says this, but what does the book end on is finding her lost poetry collection was in fact disguised as this, vanishing art.
I think, I do think that it does this book a disservice to say that it is saying any particular thing loudly and without having the in a Grovian way, without having its antithesis built into it.
Right. I think that the book is showing the way, like, the thing is that there is a conspiracy going on in this book, but the conspiracy,
it's a conspiracy of one, first of all.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that a lot of conspiracies generally work partly on having a bunch of unwitting dupes.
Yes.
But I think it's that, really the conspiracy in this works kind of the way that magic works in a good fantasy novel, of it's a metaphor for the larger thing of, just the way that, social institutions can, with many people, it can suppress marginalized artists, and can do so without where most of the people on the ground who are participating and supporting this can genuinely, honestly say, that I'm not doing it deliberately. And yet, if you step back and look at the effect, so I don't think that, there doesn't have to be a conspiracy is a useful thesis statement for the book. But I think that it also, the conspiracy is more working on a metaphorical level than it's also not saying that there is has to be a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we've arrived at a dialectical synthesis there.
All right, great.
So I have a couple of questions for you in the hopes of arriving at more dialectical syntheses. One of them is, what did you think about Garreau and the scene where we meet Garreau, beyond the extremely funny joke of him having demolished just one of these old, stately suburban homes in order to build a postmodern monstrosity, but it's still in the right neighborhood for him to be living in. How did you feel about that scene?
I mean, so actually, that scene didn't stick with me nearly as much as the one a little bit later where you realize that he's the one who pulled the string to get Matilda the Dunn residency.
Oh, okay. Say more about that.
Well, because she overhears them talking about how, it's about search terms, and you realize that what got Matilda the Dunn residency is that Garreau has, reads his website statistics, because he's absolutely that kind of narcissist. Mm-hmm. So that when he finds that somebody is looking for, finds the Garreau residency specifically because she's looking for information on Hermia, that he decides, oh, wouldn't it be hilarious to pull strings and get this person a Dunn residency?
Yes, that absolutely makes sense.
Right? And because obviously he's exactly that kind of narcissist where he enjoys the idea that he's going to jerk this historian, this person who he at the time I think thinks is a historian, or at least somebody who, is really doing research and really cares, which is true about Matilda. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that he's the sort of person who just is absolutely awful to everybody and rationalizes it away by being like, well, I'm an artist, and so everything I do is art. Yes,
that seems to be the case. He's one of the most ideal wizards that we have yet come across.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely top tier wizarding, and he doesn't even need special powers.
Yes, he exists within a culture which gives him all of the power that he needs, which in this case is academia and high art.
Well, and money. It's academia, and also the fact that his dad was super rich.
Yes. I do love that his basic, when asked why, it was like, I didn't like it. I didn't like her stuff. I didn't like what she did. It all just gave me the ick. In the same way that's why Matilda doesn't like, the Garreau aesthetic.
And actually that is really interesting and that did surprise me, because I sort of expected him to be to talk about how her value as an artist was made, thus makes erasing it even more important. But no, he can't bring himself, even though this would actually, I think, be a better artistic statement. Right. He can't bring himself to acknowledge, the artistic value of this woman's work because, she's icky.
No, I mean, the reason that Griselda is his ideal student and understands him and probably is fucking him, I think that we're led to infer that, is that she knows exactly what his deal is, which is why when she sublimates somebody's work, it's because she doesn't like them and for no other reason.
Right. Yes. Well, no, she has one other reason, which is that she does like, or at least find Matilda very interesting, and sublimating somebody else's work makes a great cover.
True.
For her.
But she did say that she was going to do it anyway.
Right, yes, and she almost certainly was. And, and she, Matilda wouldn't care if she'd burned Matilda's work and put it in a vial, but she, she's not she doesn't actually care about Matilda's art, or maybe she does and she respects it. But, the art, she makes a point of giving this one guy his destroyed art back,
Right.
but not Matilda, because, she's destroying Matilda's art, or actually failing to destroy Matilda's art, specifically to keep her in the program. And she's destroying this other guy's art, I think mostly just to make him sad.
Yes. No. She understands that Garot's work is based largely on
Interpersonal
hostility. Exactly. And jockeying for position, which is one of the reasons why she and Hector, alone among the resident students, go to see this business seminar and are actively interested in that. Like, they definitely want to, they definitely feel like it's part of their artistic process to dominate and control the people around him. And I think that's because they understand that that's part of Garot's art as well.
Yes, I mean, I have to say, like, Griselda is a better artist than Garot.
No, he is going to regret bringing her into his inner circle. I am 100%
He absolutely
certain
is, and I really hope that that she makes him regret every minute of it someday. Because I mean, part of why is that I genuinely think that for Garot, this is entirely just like knee-jerk aesthetics and impressing people, and Griselda like has internalized this. It's also the thing that you see in a lot of authoritarian countries where the second generation of leadership is completely bonkers because they grew up on the like genuinely believing in the propaganda that their parents' generation spread to get power.
Yes.
And this is how you end up with like the Cultural Revolution.
Wow. That was not a connection that I was expecting to hear, but I think it really works. Oh God, save us from the true believers.
I mean, because that's really what Griselda makes me think of. Like, because even when she flips and gets really into, Matilda's aesthetics and fixations, she's doing it partly as part of like her artistic process for the weird Grovian stuff that she's doing. So,
Yes.
Which again this is not meant to be praise of Griselda, who is a nightmare on every conceivable level, including just the fact that she funds, taking her poorer friends with her to this ritual, and then when she's like, nope, got that out of my system, I'm done, doesn't even have like the courtesy to pay for the next 2 nights of the hotel.
Nope, that part of her life is over. At least for the time being, until next summer, perhaps.
Yeah. I was glad for Erskine and Lily that, they're finally getting away from these people. They're finally moving away and will hopefully, they're making an escape of their own. And I hope that their escape is more successful than Matilda's various failed escapes.
I mean, we can but hope. We can but hope. Question number 2, and I brought this up earlier. Why don't you think there's any sex in this book? Or like,
I don't know.
I
was wondering, I mean, some of it I think is just about, like, sex is messy and unpretty.
Yes, there is that sort of thing that we get very early on about how Stephen Tennant dumps Siegfried Sassoon because Sassoon sees him without his makeup on.
Right.
One can't imagine that there was a lot of messy sex going on in that relationship under the circumstances.
And I mean, part of Matilda's power comes from being theoretically telling us everything, and yet also being such a black box that we don't know whether or not she's trans, for example.
Yes.
And like, it is possible to write a sex scene where that's all kept behind the curtain, but I don't know if it's possible for Matilda to like have sex in a way that that preserves her own mystery.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that like the book is very much interested in sexual orientation as an othering attribute in the same way that it is about race, but it is not at all interested
and as an aesthetic. And
as an aesthetic, absolutely. As an aesthetic and as an othering attribute, but not as a
lived experience
no.
of the thing that actually makes it a sexual orientation.
Right. Certainly there is no prospect of pair bonding under these circumstances. the very best you can hope for is a traveling companion.
Yeah.
For at least, the next couple of manor houses. It strikes me as a awfully lonely existence. Like the desperation with which Matilda accepts Griselda's not actually an invitation to come drink with her, and just tells her all the information that is going to end up, putting her life in Griselda's hands, just because she's so desperate to talk to somebody who's not horrible, or rather, not horrible in the way that the other people at the Institute are horrible.
She's just, well, the thing is that Griselda is horrible, but she's not boring.
Right.
Everyone else in the Institute is deeply... The whole, like, oh yeah, I just call them the toast people because they eat so much unbuttered toast, and then, like, the kid from Wisconsin or whatever is like, but we all eat a lot of unbuttered toast.
Whew. The sheer specificity of the nightmare that is the Fellowship is just, like, A+ as far as I'm concerned. Minor notes, darling. Since we're getting close to the end of this, shall we just go into minor notes?
Yes.
Because the world is, speaking of conspiracies, the world is conspiring to make this podcast extremely difficult to record. My favorite joke in the book is when Matilda overhears Griselda and Erskine Lily arguing about Universal Basic Orion. Orion being a particularly nice local pink fizzy wine. And Soccer Tort, which pretty much sums up the whole idea that any of this could possibly be about revolutionary politics in the slightest.
Yes!
Despite the fact that Griselda insists that that's what she's doing.
And Griselda insists that that's what she's doing, and, like, Matilda seems to believe that there is something, more political here than just her existence, that aesthetics are both moral and also politics, and
yes.
in an inherent way, as opposed to the arbitrary way that I personally think they are.
Yeah, no, I think the book is very good at demonstrating that this is not necessarily the case. I love the ping-ponging back and forth between aestheticism and asceticism, if you will, unless those words came out as exactly the same from my mouth.
No. I think you're right.
It reminded me of the work of a guy named Tomohiko Morimi, who's written a bunch of light novels that were made into anime. I haven't read the light novels, but I've watched the anime ones, which... among them, The Tatami Galaxy, The Night a Short Girl Walk On, An Unusual Family, or however you want to pronounce it. An Ecstatic Family is another way that one's translated, but which all are about this sort of very, very gender swimmy, vagabond party, Kyoto specific, like Kyodai life, and which all have these very sort of, no, it's the next morning and we need to grow up and become like useful members of society endings, at least in the animes. Which is part of what this reminded me of, although they also have a magical liqueur that is produced in Kyoto, which is very much like Orion in those stories. And I think that possibly, not to get all, not to be, again, a dialectics person about it, but I think the answer is probably closer to the middle path there. Not necessarily complete disillusion or complete devotion to the norm, but a mysterious third thing.
I mean, that's the eternal quest, right? It's for the mysterious third thing. And part of what makes these books like this one compelling, I think, is that even if they do not give you a successful mysterious third thing, they, you want to watch somebody else try to find it.
You're definitely rooting for her, even as you know that it's ultimately a doomed escapade.
Yes, and I mean, even though, I know that, like, in person I would probably find her kind of annoying, and even sometimes, like, reading, I was just like, come on, get over yourself. But I'm nonetheless rooting for her. It helps that everyone around her is so much worse.
I mean, that's part of her gift. The whole aesthetic fascism thing that she was talking about earlier is that because of her upbringing, this has to be moral in some way. You know, you are rooting for her in some way simply because of where she's coming from. Um, it's one of the few like it's one of the few stories that I've read, perhaps because of that, that like really lets sort of a sort of a hazy-eyed appreciation of luxury feel like something important, or like a coherent, a coherent statement. Um, it, I was reminded weirdly of the music of Vampire Weekend, um,
Okay.
uh, or the anime that Ezra Koenig did, Neo Yokio, which is like this sort of rueful but genuine love for the finer things and for the best kind of the cultural of the rich, which is sort of a vanishing point. Or the Grand Budapest Hotel, which we happened to watch the night we recorded this episode, which is based on the work of Stefan Zweig, another one of those forgotten interwar figures. It's one of those things that it's like pleasant to allow oneself to be persuaded by, even as one knows that it's an illusion. um, but maybe that's possibly just me.
I think that the book does a very good job of selling the appeal of this. It didn't entirely work on me because, as much as I love beautiful, ornate old things, first of all, the alcoholism.
Yep.
But, the alcoholism and just the fact that all this stuff is always on the verge of falling apart. And there's, and I think that the willful denial of that as like a survival strategy just makes me somewhat existentially anxious.
I was going to say, yeah, the problem with me fully getting on board with this is that in addition to being a fancy lad at heart, I'm also an anxious person. um, and I think that I'm fundamentally too anxious.
Right. Like you have to be willing to set aside a lot of concerns about the future to really commit yourself to this kind of thing. And so I did find myself being somewhat anxious on her behalf, and the book got a little easier for me when I went, wait, why am I doing this? She's not anxious on her behalf. I refuse to worry about this person when she refuses to worry about herself. If she ends up doomed, well, I'm sure she'll get something out of the narrative.
I love the part where she like is crashing with her brother, with Malachi, and is like I only remembered that, like, how incredibly precarious my position was once in those 3 weeks, and it was while I was asleep, and thank God for that, because I would have basically been destroyed otherwise. And yeah, that doesn't work for me, unfortunately.
No.
That is not how my brain is wired.
No. It's because you were saying the thing about the loneliness a while ago about their existence, and I think when she's crashing with Malachi, that you really do get a sense of how lonely this is, because these are two people who clearly care about each other, and for the sake of what they're, how the way that they want to live their life, they have to cut each other off because they're not able to sell their respective grifts otherwise.
Or just the sense that Erskine Lilly is going to cut her off just because she knows, just because she knows his old name, and that's it. And like, whether that's true or not, the fact that that fits with her understanding of the world is like, it's so lonely. It's so fundamentally isolating to think this way. There can be no possibility of community on the other side of this kind of escape, because it's also tenuous.
So, which, you know, I think for me at least, that ends up limiting the revolutionary potential of this.
Oh yeah.
But but you know, again, I think this personally, this book did not work well for me as a manifesto, but that's fine.
I don't think it's supposed to be.
I don't think it's supposed to be either. And despite the opening thing, like I had this interesting sort of dissonance initially because of the way that the book opens, like dedicated to, you know, solidarity, love, and adoration for all those resisting universal tedium, to all those struggling with fascism, racism, and capitalism in any of their forms.
First of all, interestingly enough, that dedication not present in the audiobook.
See, once again, this shapes, you know, experience of the book, because I went into this, really, I ended up reading this book as something of a, like, failure to, you know, of feeling like this book has an agenda, but is too committed to, like, not necessarily honesty, but, you know, really communicating a truth that ends up sort of undermining its own thesis.
Well, this book was also like published as part of a program, like as part of this 20 in 2020 thing, where it's like 20 Black British authors were going to have their books published. And it almost feels like there's an element of protective coloration about this book. Not to get too meta about it, but it's like, to get this book published, it feels like there's part of sort of the trappings of the political revolutionary stuff around it.
Around it, but not actually in it. And I will note, in this dedication, the S of solidarity is one of those incredibly ornate, you know, old-fashioned calligraphic with, like, leaves and vines and flowers and, you know.
Yes, Universal Basic Orion and Soccer Tort. It's the same joke.
Right, exactly.
Gay luxury space communism for all, or whatever it was. Luxury trans space furry communism.
Yes, of course, you know, and also, and then somewhat ironically, it is, again, being distributed in the U.S. by Duke University Press, so.
I mean, amazing stuff. But yes, at the end of the day, a wonderful book, a complex book, a really pleasurable book, a really depressing book.
It's absolutely worth the read. Thank you, whoever it is who recommended this to us. You know, Isaac, who I think enjoyed every minute of this, and me, who came out of this with a particularly bad migraine, are equally grateful to you for bringing this book into our lives. Yes. Perhaps Isaac a little bit more grateful, honestly, but, like, I am genuine in my thanks.
Well, you know, I mean, after every fixation, there's a hangover, you know. I know every time I love something this much immediately.
Yeah, so you got the fixation and I got the hangover. This is not fair.
Well, you know, I'm trying to absorb a little of that pain back into me, right? If I can possibly do that, you know, out of solidarity.
Yes. Fair enough. No, and again, great depiction of what it is like to feel a hyperfixation, like, settling in, and
the sense of trepidation that comes with this.
Yes. So, no, great book. Definitely worth the read.
All right. Well, we'll end it there.
Yes, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. I think we can just about slip Vivian Stanchel in here, who is one of those self-conscious aesthete eccentrics. And it killed him, but it kills all of them. Here's a song he wrote about that. The cracks are showing, the cracks are showing. Listen to the loonies croon. While the man in the moon they've left behind is rising in the east. Hey-oh, the way things are, the clocks are showing their teeth. tick. Grandfather stopped. Time for time to flash your dazzling dentures. Hey-oh, the way things are. The cracks are showing. The cracks are showing. The cracks are showing. The cracks